Yeah, thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I am very pleased to stand in support of these bills before the Senate today. And I must say, when I nearly fell asleep during Senator Colbeck's presentation, but let me tell you, Senator Colbeck, we know what it's about. We know what it's about. It's about trying to reduce the conditions of seafarers both here and internationally. I was at the committee and I'll tell you, I could see what the business people were pushing for. They want to reduce the wages and conditions of seafarers in this country. They don't want to give seafarers a fair go. And your definition of globalisation is exactly what you claim it's not. It's about trying to push the wages and conditions in this country down, trying to push it down to the lowest level. And Senator MacDonald, if you would stop...
Senator Cameron, please stop worrying about the interjections and please address your remarks to the Chair.
I'm not... Madam Acting Deputy President, I'm never worried about interjections. The more the merrier. Certainly from Senator MacDonald and Senator Colbeck, that's fine. And let me tell you, in terms of this bill, it's clear that the two people who contributed to the bill today really don't understand what it's about. What would you expect from the coalition? What would you expect from the coalition anyway? You know, a coalition who were absolute economic incompetence, whose only argument about trying to improve productivity. We hear about productivity and costs. What were their approach in 11.5 years of our government? It was to try and destroy the wages and conditions of workers in this country, to try and force it down to the bottom. That's the coalition. That's the coalition, and they are waiting with the work choices in their back pocket, waiting to come back, waiting to support big business and trying to drive wages and conditions down. Now, we heard Senator Joyce and Senator Colbeck. Well, let me give a bit of advice to Senator Colbeck. You should stop worrying about this bill, because this is a bill that will benefit Tasmania. What you should do...
Senator Cameron.
Cameron's been around long enough to know that he doesn't address senators across the table, and his remarks should be through the chair.
There's no point of order, Senator MacDonald, and I have brought this to Senator Cameron's attention. Thank you.
Thank you. And through the chair, I would ask Senator Colbeck to actually concentrate on the real issues for Tasmania. Because the real issues for Tasmania are to get an effective, efficient, long-term viability shipping fleet in this country. And that's what this bill is about. And if the Tasmanian senators actually stood up here and fought for Tasmania, they would be fighting against the sycophantic approach of the West Australian Liberal Party to Twiggy Forrest, Gina Reinhart and Clive Palmer, who are in there arguing that all the money should be in Western Australia or in Queensland, and Tasmania should be left to swing. That's the position. It's okay for Senator Colbeck to leave the chamber now, but a bit of advice to Senator Colbeck: if you want to stand up for Tasmania through the chair, stand up against the mining magnates who want to rip any decent taxation from this country back. We are a nation that's been built on shipping. We need a viable, growing shipping industry. But that has to be done on decent wages and decent conditions. And you know what we hear is this: oh, we're in a globalised economy. But that is simply code to say that we want overseas maritime workers to be plying their trade in this country on the lowest wages and conditions possible. That's what the coalition want. That's what they've always been about. That's why the Howard government and Senator Sinodinos has just walked in. That's why he was up to his neck in ripping away the conditions of maritime workers in this country. That's why Senator Sinodinos was sitting around the cabinet table with the cabinet, sitting advising John Howard. On one hand, you've got to do something about the carbon price, and then backflipping when he comes in here. You know, this is the hypocrisy of the coalition. the absolute hypocrisy of the Coalition. And, you know, their idea of improving productivity is to put dogs in the wharfs. Put the dogs in the wharfs. Get the thugs in the wharfs with their balaclavas, trying to get rid of workers that are earning a decent wage, get rid of them and put in lower wages and conditions. So we all know what the Coalition are about. But you know what you have to understand? What you have to understand is that the MUA are here to stay. The MUA are here to stay. They are going to have decent conditions on the wharfs and decent conditions in the industries that they're involved in. I've got to tell you that the arguments being put forward by Senator Joyce don't bear any analysis whatsoever. And I find that I don't often agree with Senator Joyce, but I do agree with Senator Joyce on the Productivity Commission, that you've got to take the Productivity Commission with a big grain of salt, given their ideological bent to come after working people wherever they can. And Senator Joyce, his view on the Productivity Commission, on the public record, is that you should use Productivity Commission reports for toilet paper. That's his argument. And yet he comes in here today because the Coalition have said you've got to oppose this bill. And what does he argue for? He argues for a Productivity Commission inquiry. The disingenuous approach from Senator Joyce. On one hand, use the Productivity Commission reports as toilet paper. Even I don't say that. And then he comes in here and says, let's have a Productivity Commission inquiry. What a joke. What a load of rubbish from the Coalition. A Productivity Commission inquiry about making sure we'll get decent wages and conditions and a decent industry in this country. Well, Senator Joyce just gave the game away. And you know, I think Senator Urquhart outlined earlier the National Party's policy on shipping. What is the National Party's policy on shipping? The National Party's policy on shipping is almost word for word this bill. Almost word for word what the government's seeking to do. So my view is, again, you know, Senator Joyce needs to have some credibility. I know he hasn't got a lot in his economic, basis. I know that he got sacked, because he couldn't cop, his shadow portfolio in finance. But he's got to have a little bit of credibility left, and he should actually support the National Party policy. And the National Party policy says this, and this is at page 65 of the National Party's policy. It says that they would introduce a tonnage tax. That, I don't suppose, is a great big new tax, but they want to introduce a tonnage tax. And to do that, they said, if they were in power from 2011-12. And that company tax would be on an opt-in basis linked to mandatory training arrangements. So mandatory training arrangements for the industry from the National Party. We support that. That view. That they would introduce a national system of training support under the supervision of the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. Again, we'll cop that. And they would examine ways to reduce the income tax disadvantage suffered by Australian seafarers operating outside Australian waters compared with seafarers from other nations. Well, now's your chance. Now's the chance for the National Party, instead of getting up here, as Senator Joyce did, and run disingenuous speeches that he doesn't actually believe in. So he's got to spend half his speech talking about a carbon price when he doesn't understand the industry and doesn't know the benefits that this will provide for the industry. The National Party could now stand up and actually support its policy, actually support what it stands for, and stop flip-flopping around every time the Liberal Party tell you you can't support your own policy. Stand up for your own policy and support this bill. That's what you should be doing. So a tonnage tax is National Party platform. Ours is a zero tax rate as recommended by the industry and the Treasury. So we can get some agreement on that. They want a national training system. The bipartisan committee supported that, and so does Labour's shipping bill. We want a tax exemption for Australian seafarers. So does the National Party. So support it. So support that. We want to establish a second register. So does the National Party. The National Party should support it. So when this bill comes to the floor, I would expect the National Party to be actually supporting their own policy and supporting this bill, because that's the right thing to do. This is a good bill. It's about ensuring that we've got an industry in this country that can help service the needs of Australia. We are a shipping nation, and we should support our shipping industry and make sure that we do the right thing by the industry. There has been clearly in the shipping industry political interference under the Howard government, supported by Senator Sinodinos. So you'll know when Senator Sinodinos gets up on his feet here, you'll know he's the guy that sat around with John Howard and Peter Reith saying, crush the MUA, put the dogs on the docks, put the thugs on the docks, we'll drive wages down. That's Senator Sinodinos. You know, he gets the Australian writes about Senator Sinodinos and said, we've got this great new economic mind coming into Parliament. Well, Senator Sinodinos sat with John Howard and said, how do we fix our economic problems? We try and destroy the MUA. We try and drive wages and conditions down for workers all over this country. And Senator Sinodinos will continue that when he stands up here and opposes this bill, because this is about a sophisticated economic and industry development position taking this country forward. It's not about the lowest common denominator. It's not about trying to cut costs at the expense of maritime workers. It's not about trying to cut costs at the expense of maritime workers' jobs. It's about training. It's about cooperation. It's about a compact. It's about sophisticated tax support for the industry, something that happens overseas. But in the 11.5 years that the Howard government were in place, they never even thought about it. Not once did they think about it. So we'll have Senator Sinodinos, you know, the so-called economic guru that's coming in here. You know, he'll be in there railing against government interference. Yet, you know, when he was sitting there with John Howard, you know, working up how we should interfere in industry, you know, what was his plan? Put the Alsatians on the docks. Put the Rottweilers on the docks. Put the thugs on the docks. That's what was done by the Howard government, supported in the Senate by Senator MacDonald. So, you know, they've got them all sitting there opposing this bill, a bill that is based on a sophisticated approach to industry development, bringing our industry into line with what happens in about 40 other countries overseas. That is supporting our industry with a decent tax base. But what you will get is speeches like we got from Senator Colbeck, speeches from Senator Joyce, and I suppose Senator Sinodinos will be a little bit more sophisticated than Senator Joyce, but that won't be very hard. That won't be very hard. So that's what we'll get. But my view is, if we're talking about the problems for the country, it's not. The problems the country's facing are not about you know, this bill. This is a bill about improving the lot of the industry, improving the life of maritime workers, improving every aspect of the industry through training, sophisticated tax approaches, and building our industry. It's not about artificial restrictions, as Senator Colbeck would have it. You know, it's not about the cost of shipping, because this will be done in a cost-effective way, a sophisticated way that means that we will have a decent industry in this country. And that's what Senator Sinodinos, when he gets up to speak, should talk about. Getting a decent, sophisticated industry in this country that is about bringing Australia back to where it was, a strong maritime nation, capable of moving some of our own goods, and workers getting decent wages and decent conditions. Because that's the problem. When you do it here, you have to pay decent wages and decent conditions. And I'll tell you, I was a bit sick and tired listening to some of those submissions at the Senate inquiry, where some of those dry goods people were coming in and basically saying they want to continue to exploit overseas maritime workers, keep them on as low a possible wage as they can to keep the cost down in this country. That's not the way to do business. We've got to be a bit more sophisticated than that. But when you hear the speeches from the other side this morning, you would well know that they have got no capacity to deliver on that. They've got no understanding of the real drivers for the industry. It's simply about cost. Simply about cost. It's not about the tax base and making sure that helps the industry. It's not about the training in the industry. It's not about a compact in the industry where the unions can sit down with the employers and improve the productive performance of the industry. It's got nothing to do with that. They are simply responding, as they always respond, when business says this will cost us a little bit extra. They run behind their big business mates and they will oppose anything that's in the interest of workers in this country. They will oppose sophisticated approaches because what they're all about is the low road on industrial relations, the low road on productivity, and that was borne out by the two speeches we heard this morning. Thank you.